And we're live with his Jeffness and
Hey.
Bradley. Yeah, so there, Jeff. Yeah.
No problem. I was just saying, hey.
Yep. Yeah.
This is our Homicide Life on the Street Season 7 in review hangout. And, excuse me, we're going to do this in two parts. So this is part one. And we'll cover approximately the first half, maybe a little bit more of the season in this one. And then we'll finish up at a future date to be determined later. So, yeah, as Ben said, Bradley is here with us. And he hasn't seen as many of the episodes in the first half, so probably won't have as many comments in this part, but probably more in the second one. So first I'm going to just read this little brief thing about the season itself, and then I'll get into the episodes. And what we'll do is I'll read a brief recap, and then I'll make whatever comments I want to about that particular episode, my opinion of it, and Ben will, and anything else that springs to mind related to the characters or anything they went through in that, and then we'll move on to the next one and do it like that. And Ben's got some pictures from each episode, and so I'll be trying to remind him to switch when we get to the next episode. And I'll review our scores for as we go. So this Wikipedia article says the 7th season of Homicide Life on the Street aired in the United States on the NBC television network from September 25th, 1998 to May 21st, 1999, and contained 22 episodes. The 7th season marked the debut of characters FBI agent Mike Giardello, played by Giancarlo Esposito, and Detective Renee Shepard, played by Michael Michel. Recurring character Detective Terry Stivers, played by Tony Lewis, became a regular cast member as of season 7, while Chief Medical Examiner George Griscom, played by Austin Pendleton, becomes a recurring character following the season 6 departure of Chief Medical Examiner Juliana Cox. The DVD box, again, I don't read that part, but during the 6th season, NBC had been considering canceling the show in the face of consistently low ratings, but a number of shocks at NBC increased Homicide's value. Among those factors were the loss of the popular series Seinfeld and the $850 million deal needed to keep ER from leaving the network. As a result, the network approved a 22-episode 7th season. And I'll just say one note before I go to the first episode that it's funny, it says consistently low ratings because the ratings Homicide got at that time. Today, if a show got those ratings on network TV, it would be considered a hit. But that just tells you how much has changed about viewing habits and ratings, that network TV has so much competition nowadays that the ratings Homicide got then would actually be considered really good if they got them now. Anyway, the first episode of the season was entitled La Familia, and it was written by Tom Fontana and directed by Nick Gomez. And in it, Bayless Gardy and Ballard return to duty to find a completely remodeled squadron and a new detective in the unit, Renee Shepard, fresh from the fugitive squad. Everyone is called in to work a trio of savage murders in Little Italy, with one of the victims being G's cousin Mario. G's estranged son Mike, an FBI agent stationed in Phoenix, arrives in town and helps close the case, whose roots stretch back to Mario's choice to testify against a union boss 25 years earlier. Bayless exhibits a new Buddhist-influenced philosophical attitude toward his work, and hints of relationships among the detectives begin to surface, including one between Munch and Billy Lou. Of course, Billy Lou's not a detective, but anyway. Yeah, and the gist of that stuff was that it was there was some kind of dance, I think, some kind of thing that everyone was asking Shepard to, and then she was telling everybody no, but then she decided to go. Or originally she told Lewis she would go with him, then changed her mind because it was that they were partners and didn't want to complicate things, and anyway, all that kind of mess. But yeah, we got. It was an interesting way to start a season when there had been a lot of changes over the season. The squad room redecorated and all that after the previous season. It ended with the cops being shot and Pendleton resigning and all that stuff. So it was kind of not anticlimactic, but just sort of a calm after the storm, you might say, in terms of the beginning of the season. So it was a little bit more subdued, but of course they made the particular murders they were dealing with even more grisly than some of the previous ones. So, but you could tell, yeah, that definitely, they put the women detectives in the in the outfits. They were trying to get the eye candy factor raised in this first episode for sure. Anyway, Ben, you got anything to say about La Familia?
Well, my overall thoughts are when you mentioned there about Stivers becoming a regular character. Did she ever really get her own story in this season?
I would say not much. I mean, she had episodes where she had more scenes, and she had at least one where she was the primary on the case. But there wasn't any exploration of her personal life or anything like that, other than just a few comments when she was talking about other people's personal life, like getting up in Ballard and Falzones.
Yeah, it was almost like she seemed to be someone who was emotionally sophisticated in terms of her advice to people, and like I said, she was almost like some sort of sage to other people's relationships. Anyhow, so this particular episode, so I felt that the performance of Michael was it was okay in this one, but then he got a lot better in the other episodes. But it might have just been me being in a bad mood. I don't know. But he was definitely good in the episodes after this.
Seeing the pictures again, I can say that when I talked about the eye candy factor, it wasn't just the women too, because they were dressing Mike Giardello in those outfits showing his muscles. So they were trying to do it on both sides, the males and the females.
Yeah, and also, was this season, did they have Foul Zone boxing in this season? Or was that the previous season?
That was this season.
That was this season. Yeah, I couldn't remember what episode that was in.
Because I remember you had Ballard seeing him in the ring boxing and getting turned on by that.
Yeah, I think that was actually in Just an Old-Fashioned Love Song that first was going on, because I think it was they went and saw, that's right, because it was about the death of the sports medicine specialist, so they went and saw the guy who was the cut man at the boxing thing, because he had dealings with them. Yeah, that's how it came out, with the boxing came into it.
Yeah, they had this thing where all the guys were sort of like after Shepherd, or maybe it was Lewis, and
and Bayless, they all asked her out.
Oh, and Bayless as well, yeah. I remember this. Was I saying something at the time, something like this could have been better about G's background?
Probably. Seeing the pictures made me think the actual case itself was kind of run of the mill in terms of the solution. Like it wasn't that difficult for them to find the culprit. They just had to, because they weren't really that smart, even though they were dedicated to avenging their father after all those years. But anyway, it was very obvious that they didn't want to start the season with a case that was too complicated. They wanted the case to be simple and the episode to be more about the character interactions.
Yeah, I don't really got much to say about that. I don't know why I worked in Shannon Worry as the random photo, but that gives you an idea of how much they put up the sex appeal for this episode.
Yeah, she was not in this episode.
Unfortunately.
But the other thing was Gardy and his wife was like going down the tubes. He took his wife to that event, but you could tell that they were not getting along, weren't particularly interested in each other. So
I can't. What do you anything to say, Jeff, about this episode?
And Munch was actually annoyed by Bayless. In the past, it was funny. I think I did point out in the review at the time that often Munch had been the one sort of spouting philosophy to people, and I think he was irritated in this episode that Bayless was the one that was doing that, and he was getting tired of it. And I think he was kind of a little jealousy of that's his role, is to be the guy who spouts philosophy. Bayless should stop encroaching on his territory.
It might also be the thing that NTs might not get a little bit like, if I know Bayliss isn't an NF, but going NF about it might irk them.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, God.
Okay, so if you want to go ahead and switch the pictures over for the next episode, I will say that...
bloody hell. I almost pressed stop the broadcast by mistake. Now I've got to watch that because there's 2 stop buttons.
Unless Bradley has anything to say about this episode, I'm assuming you didn't see it.
No.
Okay.
I think the 3rd episode is the first one I saw.
All right, so Ben will do that, and I'll just say that both Ben and I gave this episode a 7, so for an average of 7, obviously. And we move on to episode 2, Brotherly Love, which after the first episode had a disturbing series of murders, this one was only one murder, but sort of a disturbing thing nonetheless. The actual murder itself was not grisly or anything, but Lewis and Shepard investigate the shooting death of a man in his own home. The long-standing rivalry between the victim and his identical twin brother leads them to a reason for the killing. Ballard and Gardy team up with a narcotics detective from Washington, D.C., played by Joe Perry from Aerosmith, by the way, to check out a teenager's fuzzy account of a D.C. drug buy that led to his friend being shot and killed. Mike surprises G with news of his transfer into the Baltimore PD as an FBI agent liaison, and Gardy decides to leave his wife. And that was written by Julie Martin and directed by Peter Medak. The thing I remember about this is like how the story with the drug buy thing was kind of the comic relief part. It was funny because, you know, the teenager didn't know, like, he kept changing his story, like what he didn't know what color the car was or what the guys looked like. And so they became more and more frustrated, but they were still having fun anyway because they get to drive around in the dude's convertible, the narcotics cop. And that was part of what was compelling Gardy to decide he was going to leave his wife, because he was, doing that guardian midlife crisis thing where he's looking around thinking, is this all there is, being the family man? And then I want to, like, be wild and drive a convertible and ask out Billy Lou, even though he ends up finding out she's got a thing for Munch. So, and of course the identical twin thing, they actually got me a little bit with that, because I was thinking maybe it would end up being a twist that, the mother had done it or something like that. And as it turned out, it ended up being exactly who they thought it was. But anyway, they still, it was effectively disturbing. I'll just say that.
I don't really remember this episode.
Made a huge impact on Ben.
I think that woman was quite good. I can't remember.
Yeah, so when they had the QRT guy there, because what they ended up having to stop the dude. He was gonna, like, kill himself, I think, and that was why he had the gun, and then so they had to kind of talk him down.
So I think folks should realise that we probably watched this about 6 months ago.
Yeah,
because some of the weeks were missed out. Yeah.
If you don't have stuff to say about it, we can move on. It's not a big deal. I don't have a lot to say about it. Whatever I said at the time still stands.
Yeah, I suppose it's good that it gave that not only is Billy Lou going without another man, it's Munch. And it's like Garty, Garty, right? I want to call him Stuart. So Stuart, he's reminded every time he sees Munch that him.
And there's already been, I think before this, there was already a little bit of a rivalry or a little bit of conflict between Munch and Garty, and it just gets escalated in the season because of Billy Lou and then the Vietnam stuff. It just kind of builds.
You remember, I think it was a previous season, the stuff about the basketball guy and the little nerd killed him, and then there's all the stuff, and Munch identified with the guy, and then Stuart goes up to him and says, "Okay, give me your best shot," and then Munch picks up a flipping heavy ashtray, and he goes to hit him with it. Well, that was played like that, and so it's like Munch sort of like, well, it depends how it was played, how you interpret it. He related to what the kid went, and I remember the performance of the kid was very good. And was that the one that also had the flashback to Munch being a youth, or was that a different story?
I don't remember specifically what you're talking about. It's not the one that was focused on that, but there may have been a brief one. I don't remember. Seeing the guest cast, though, reminded me Walt MacPherson was in this episode. That's Gaffney, even though you didn't have a picture of him, because he was the one that, proved the thing about the FBI agent liaison, and it was a good scene because it was back to the kind of politics of it, because Gaffney basically wanted someone to spy on G and report to him on what he was doing, so presumably so that he could undermine him in some way, and may have been, although they never really explored that later in the season. He may have been part of what was going on when they kept having problems with like leaks when they asked information about the FBI or from the FBI, that Gaffney may have been involved. They never really followed up on that. But
right,
anyway.
so that's two strands that we picked up in this episode. The one with Mike Giardello being compromised a little bit, this sort of like dual role of with the Gaffney thing that you mentioned, and also the setting up the arc with Stewart. And I think maybe my favorite episode of the season is the one about Vietnam. I'm not sure. It's up there. I think I gave that one 10, but we'll mention that when we get to it.
There was only 2 episodes in the season you gave a 10, and that was one of them.
So, but apart from that, those 2 themes with Stewart, and then the one with Michael Giardello, I've not really got much else to say about this one.
Okay. All right. So, and we both gave that episode a 7 also. You can see a pattern there with with that. So we move on to episode 3, Just an Old-Fashioned Love Song, written by Eric Overmeyer and directed by Leslie Libman and Larry Williams. And in this one, Ballard and Mike take the case of an intruder found shot dead in the garage of a sports medicine specialist. The victim is his sister-in-law, who had run up large gambling debts and was desperate to pay them off with or without his help. Munch faces an IRS audit and a bill for $30,000 in back taxes. Shepard and Bayless decide to go out on a date after revealing their thoughts about bisexuality to each other. Falzone thinks about asking Ballard out, and Gardy shows interest in Billy Lou while taking time off to move out of his house. And this one we actually had 4 of us in the hangout when we reviewed it, because Bradley was there and so was Andrew, though Bradley didn't give a score, but that's fine. So I guess I can let Bradley, if he has any comments about anything he remembers about this episode or wants to say anything first, and we'll give him the opportunity.
Well, yeah, I guess it was a while ago that we were talking about it, and I only vaguely remember it. I do remember being pretty impressed, because this is like one of the first episodes of Homicide I'd ever seen, and I remember being pretty impressed of the overall feel and pacing of the show. There was, it was one of the episodes that like wasn't like hugely groundbreaking in terms of like show development or like character development, and it was just I got the sense when I was watching it that it was like a pretty standard. I really like that what his nickname was, Lemonhead. The I remember that from the episode.
Uh-huh.
And they mentioned his name was Lemonhead, and they showed him, and he indeed had the head of a lemon. So I thought that was pretty funny. But yeah, I mean, I kind of feel out like what kind of episode it was, and I knew like it wasn't supposed to be like a big deal episode, and that's fine. And I think it was an episode like just kind of a standard case, and yeah, I was pretty impressed by the show, and I really liked that it wasn't over dramatic, and not trying to push like they call them police dramas, and some of the shows are like more about the drama than the actual police work, and this is a show where it's more like a police show and less of a drama. So I really did like that. I like that about the show in general, and I really was able to take a easy watching approach to this. That in some of the shows we have to like pay pretty close attention to what's going on, and you can't really lose interest for a second because something big might happen. You might have to like backtrack to what was going on. So I really enjoyed this episode as my first episode for those reasons. Characterization was fine, acting was good, and yeah, I was just sort of like really impressed. That's my general opinion.
Ben?
My thoughts on this. I suppose, looking back on it, I think they could have done a little bit more with Billy Lou in order to get a bit more out of Munch. They had a little bit later on in the season where a friend of hers was being bothered by a guy, and Munch confronted the guy. We'll talk about that later. But I think if they'd have had a storyline where Billy Lou was more involved, it could like show an emotional side to Munch. But I think they could have brought her into it a bit more. This particular story, I don't remember a lot about.
Okay. Yeah, this was, like we mentioned a little bit earlier, the one that had the boxing thing. So it was kind of the first, but not the first, because we've seen Ballard had been a little attracted to Falzone before, but this was kind of upped that when she saw him in the boxing ring. She was quite obviously turned on by that. So she was, and it seemed like maybe this was the time where he started to actually get a clue that she was interested in him, as opposed to. In the previous episode of the beginning of the season, him acting a little bit oblivious because he was interested in Shepard, so he wasn't really thinking of Ballard that way.
Yeah, but he had to be pretty much told by Stivers.
Yeah.
Like at point blank. And it says, "Are you blind? She's really into you." Yeah. Something like that. Almost as strong as that, but not quite.
And somebody, I don't remember whether it was Stivers or somebody made a comment about how they worked together better height-wise anyway because Shepard's taller than Falzone.
Really? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Shepard. Yes, I thought you meant Ballard. I got all confused.
No, Shepard is taller than Ballard is not. So Ballard is the woman that is shorter than him. So,
although Ballard is taller than Jack Aaron. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. Right. So, right then, typological in jokes. Yes, I do remember her performance. Always when she did a little bit of light comedy, Callie Thorne, it was good. And I saw in one thing she seemed to like overdo it, but I think the way she played the humor in this series was very good. And like her being turned on by Falzone, and then like her reactions to the boxing, I think I remember that. That's pretty much it.
So Bradley, after having some more perspective and stuff like that, do you want to give this a score, or you just want to leave it at? Don't have to. No pressure.
No pressure. I mean, if I was to give it a score, I'd probably give it an 8.
8. Okay.
Yeah.
So Bradley gives it an 8. Ben gave it a 6 at the time, and I gave it a 7. And Andrew gave it a 7 also. So. That's the 4 of us, an average of 7. So there you go. All right, so we move on to episode 4, which was called The 20% Solution, and was written by David Simon and directed by Clark Johnson. And I thought Ben would probably like this episode, and I was right, he did. Days after the disappearance of a best-selling mystery writer, his wife arrives in the squad room insisting that he has been murdered. With no body or direct evidence of a crime, Ballard and Gardy scrambled to wade through the potential suspects: the writer's wife, his mistress, his agent, an ex-CIA operative, and Danvers has his hands full taking the case to trial. Munch's plans for a weekend getaway with Billy Lou are thrown into chaos when he and Bayless investigate the death of an elderly woman during a burglary attempt. The two are hard put to decide whether or not they have a murder on their hands. Taking a not-so-subtle hint from Stivers, Falzone asks Ballard out on a date. So there's the one what Ben was referring to, a not-so-subtle hint from Stivers. So, Bradley, did you see this episode?
I did, yeah, but I missed the hangout.
You got any comments on this first?
Yeah, it was. I don't think I liked this episode as much as the previous one because the whole. Truthfully, I don't remember who ended up killing the writer because it was about like all the intrigue of like who done it. Like there was the was it the agent that like stole a story?
Yeah, the agent hired somebody to do it. Was basically what it was the ex-CIA guy hired by the agent.
That's right. Yeah, so basically, the whole everyone's like pointing a finger at other people, and I think that was I mean it was reasonable, but like the whole I'm not sure how realistic it was. Like I'm not sure how many people come to the police with an idea of who basically a murder. Like someone's dead, but I think it was a murder, and I think I know who did it. Like I know it happens. It's happened like a few times in like all cop shows. I know it's happened a few times in Homicide where someone comes to the police as a suspect. So I think that part was reasonable, but the whole whenever show business is involved, it gets very to me it just seems very, it could be very disingenuous because it's sort of like I'm not sure if I call it like a self-aware plot where it's a show talking about like fame and show business. I'm not sure if it's something like that, but it definitely does call attention to like how real the storyline is, and I didn't really get the same authentic feel that I got from the previous episode. So, the whole B storyline of the home invasion or home robbery where the guy doesn't know he killed the woman. I thought that was interesting. I probably liked that more than the main case because I really like that both Bayless and Marsh decided not to tell him. There's like they both independently agreed that he was he like it was one of those bad guys with a moral compass. He's like, yeah, I'm a scumbag and I break into people's houses and steal, but I'm not a murderer, and I could never be, and I can never do something like that, and he's going to jail anyway for the for the robbery alone, and well, I think he'd already gone down for the robbery, but not the murder.
Multiple robberies. So he had confessed to like 4 or 5 of them, so they were already going to be putting him away for a while. So
yeah, so it's the why if he's already going to be going away for a crime, why tell him? Why leave him with the fact that he's a murderer? On his when he has he's morally he like the one moral he has is that he's not a murderer, and he's one point surprised that he's not a murderer. So like, why take that away from him when he's going to jail anyway? And they both mutually agreed, there's no point in telling him really. So I like that conclusion.
Did she fall down the stairs? I forgot how she died. How did she die?
I don't think she fell down anything. They just determined maybe it was like a heart attack or something. But I think that was never in doubt. But they were just trying to determine whether she had the heart attack based on the guy breaking in, or whether she was close to that anyway, or something. They're trying to determine whether or not he in any way actually caused it. So, but yeah, and I guess technically not robberies, but burglaries. But anyway, so did you want to give that one a score, Bradley?
Yeah, I'll give this one a 7.
7, okay. Do you have any comments on Ben?
Well, it seems that Callie Thorne was on good form in this, like early in the season with her comedy reactions.
I can agree with that. I think actually in the previous episode, one of the closing scenes was I think G, little G was asked her a question about women, and she did like the best, a really good like look of content. That was like half humorous, and I wish you'd actually gotten that shot in the last episode so I could like show you what it was, but I'm not sure I could like reproduce the event good enough, so I'll just leave it at that. But she does have very good comedic reactions. I'll agree with you on that. That's what I wanted to say about your point.
Yeah, and should be good if she just toned it down a little bit when, like, if she just acted like this when she did a sitcom. Because usually that's the thing where, just a quick point, folks, where the best acting in a sitcom or any kind of comedy is where it's real and funny. So, so somebody like, again, Robin Williams, who we always talk about as a really good actor.
I'll just take this opportunity to point out to anyone watching who cares, even though I don't think it's that great a show, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which was canceled, I guess, by CBS, has been picked up by NBC, so it will continue. And the relevance to Homicide is that it's a sitcom that Andre Braugher is one of the stars of. And even though I don't think the show's that great, he's still good in any scene that he's in just because he's good.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you get the right casting, and even if something's just mildly funny where you're just amused like one time in a scene, if you really like the people in it.
Yeah, when I said something about if I could get like an edit of SVU where they just had all of Munch's scenes and not the rest of it, I would watch that, and I would do the same thing with Brooklyn Nine-Nine if they just had Andre Braugher scenes and didn't have the rest of it.
That reminds me, once we've done Al Giardello as Portrait of an ESTJ, we could do Munch after that. Or maybe we could do Frank. Anyway, that's behind the scenes stuff.
We'll see. All right, so for the 20% solution, I gave it an 8. Ben gave it a 9. Bradley gave it a 7. And Andrew also gave it a 9. So that works out to an average of 8.
Now, did I say at the time that I gave it an extra point for the wife?
Maybe.
Ooh.
That one I'm not sure, because when I was going back through these, I did see you gave 2 extra points to part 2 of Wanted Dead or Alive for the bikini chicks on the beach.
2 extra points because of the 2 extra points.
Right. But I don't remember if you said that about the wife. But that's Patty Darbanville Quinn, by the way, playing the wife in 20% Solution. I'm watching, stuff from '89 and now watching Wise Guy. In this particular story arc of Wise Guy, she's one of the characters in that too.
I think this is a great shot of Ballad.
Yeah,
it is like that.
So then we move on to episode 5, which was entitled Red Wed Wine. Easy for me to say. Wed Wine, Wed Red Wine, Red Wine. Not the Neil Diamond / UB40 song, but an episode of Homicide. Written by Sarah B. Charno and directed by Ed Bianchi. And this was the one about a rash of strange flu deaths turns into a red ball once Bayless and Shepard learn that all the victims drank poisoned wine. The FBI gets involved and places Mike Giardello in charge of the case, but his decisions on strategy and public relations put him sharply at odds with his father, especially after G leaks information to the media in hopes of preventing more deaths. Bayless's reaction to a suspect's confession leaves him wondering if his outlook on life really has changed after his shooting. Rumors fly in the squad room after Falzone and Ballard's first date, while Munch confides in Lewis about a secret trip to his doctor and soon comes to regret it. So, Bradley, did you see this episode?
Yeah, even though I don't really remember this at all. I remember that the 2 Gs got into like the argument, and of course the Big G went behind Mike's back, and that caused like a huge thing between them. I don't
Ben
remember.
Obviously had Ben had a thing for this girl because he had several shots of her.
I think that was because I was just thinking at the time. So Enneagram Type 4. Right, that's Bradley.
I was just I'm actually looking at the episode charts and I'm trying to recall what went on, but I don't remember that. Besides all of the G stuff, I don't remember anything else about it.
There was a scene where Shepard kind of tried to get tough with the guy who was the suspect because he was kind of treating her like she wasn't really a cop, because she didn't, female and didn't look like a cop. So he was kind of, kind of talking down to her and talking more to Bayless, and so she kind of asserted herself, kind of tried to, kind of take a stand on that. And as the guy who was the one who was doing it was an old guy who was dying, and he basically said that he was kind of felt like everything was hopeless anyway, and that he had not made an impact on anybody, that no one was really cared that he would be dead. So he wanted to do something where they would remember him, or his impact would be felt. So that's why he decided to poison the wine.
Yeah,
and that's the part they were talking about in the recap about Bayless, because he with the Buddhism stuff, he's kind of was big on finding meaning in everything. As we've talked about many times, that tends to be an NF trait, but it obviously isn't just NFs who do that. But he was doing that, and after talking to the guys, like probably was when he started to get a little bit disillusioned about that, because of the way the guy had basically said that there wasn't it wasn't actually any kind of revenge against anybody or anything that was like anything with meaning. It was just him being callous about making an impact without any concern for what he was doing to any of the people. That he was dying, so it didn't matter.
Right. Was there a secondary case, or was there anything else significant in the episode?
Not
I don't
really.
think I remember.
Like the recap said, there were a couple of side plots, but there wasn't really another case going on because everybody was involved in the Red Ball wine case. So there was the stuff about Falzone and Ballard, and then the Munch was.
All right, the Dr. Villain.
Yeah, so there was just kind of like things that were floating around while everything else was going on, and the main conflict was between the G's about how he was handling the case.
Okay,
and how much the people were being informed, because G felt like people had a right to know what was going on, and Mike felt like we're not going to solve the case because there's going to be too much of a panic.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I guess I remember enough about it. My opinions. I think I liked it. I'm not saying that like questioning if I liked it or not. I'm just trying to remember how I felt about it when I was watching it, and I think there's nothing much to say. It's just sort of conflict between the main thing that stuck out to me was like the conflict between the two Gs, and I didn't know the characters well enough to be able to talk about like the Munch thing, or I don't think I was in tuned enough to the characters themselves to maybe that's why I'm not remembering anything else, because I didn't the characters weren't memorable to me yet, so I wasn't in tune to any of that. So I do think I like the I think I liked it. I wasn't so admittedly, I might have a bias against ESTJs who think they know best, because because I have some fairly negative experiences with self-righteous SJs in general, but ESTJs in general, because they tend to be in like positions of commandership, and it's like they have. It's not just that they're judgmental; it's that they're judgmental and they have influence enough to exert themselves. So I think. G, going behind Mike's back to do what he thought was right. gave me a bad SJ taste in my mouth. And of course, that's not a knock against the episode. It's just let's call it an ESG character flaw. Yeah, I'll just say that much.
And I think Ben might have been trying to refer to that with his HMS Inflexible there.
Yeah,
probably.
I love HMS Inflexible. That's the real name of a real ship. That's not a joke. So I really like this as an example of G going against the book, like his feeling side coming out, and almost like feeling responsible for the community. Was it part of the? Was it the idea that a guy was randomly shooting people, and G wanted people to know, or was it to do something with poisoning? I can't quite remember what G wanted people to know in the plot.
Yeah, well, he wanted to know. He wanted people to know that they should, not drink wine or check their stuff. Or
Right, that was
as
it.
opposed to, whereas Mike thought, if this gets out, everyone's going to panic and
Right.
there's going to be too much,
Right.
inundation of doctors and everything else.
Right. So, yeah, sorry to talk over you, because this is the crux of the matter for the audience, is that so you've got Junior G and the other people thinking that we've got to catch the guy, and Big G is thinking, no, we've got to save the people first. We're not going to use people as bait in order to capture him. So there's like a question there of values as to what's more important and the different approach to take. And the older G is thinking, I don't want to sacrifice people for the maybe that's like a bigger picture thing where it's almost like Junior G is being a little bit more strategic but also less personal in that instance. What do you think of that, about the dilemma and the way G acted in that, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that their approaches were, that Mike was being more methodical about it and saying, he didn't want, and neither one was necessarily more concerned for the people. I think they both were. It's just Mike was concerned from the standpoint of he thinks if people panic, it's going to make it worse. And not only will there be, we're not going to find out who's doing it, and there could be more people poisoned this way. And so he felt like it's justified to hold back this information for the greater good, that we can save more lives in the long run, as opposed to G thinking that this was something that people had a right to know.
Right then. Yeah, so it was pretty, as always in Homicide, they write things in a balanced way, probably as a result of the fact that they're just keeping it real, rather than actually going in with, we're going to have a meeting and make sure that we decide to be balanced in this issue. It's just sort of like looking at things in a realistic way and an honest way. Did you get that impression, Jeff, that it was through honesty?
And I've said that, many times, like, because a show that focuses on having good, realistic characters that are not all exactly the same, you're going to have natural conflicts, different opinions, different agendas coming out. And if you focus on writing those well, then it's not going to come across like your show is trying to push any kind of agenda. They're they're portraying those characters realistically in their perspectives on it. So I think that's one of the things Homicide does best. So did you want to give that one a score, Bradley?
I'll give it an 8.
Okay.
Ooh.
So that means that Ben and I both gave it a 7, and Andrew and Bradley both gave it an 8. So that ends up making the average about in between that, I guess, 7.5. So then we move on to the first of the two-part episodes. We had actually back-to-back two-parters. And we started with Wanted, Dead or Alive, written by James Yoshimura and directed by Robert Harmon, at least part one was. A man is shot and killed when a team of bounty hunters raids a house looking for a bail jumper. Falzone and Stivers quickly arrest one of the team members, P.J. Johnson, as the shooter, but he soon jumps his own bail to look for the fugitive. The detectives and team leader Dennis Knoll form an uneasy partnership to find Johnson, but their chase turns disastrous with a car wreck leaves Lewis and a woman seriously injured. Gardy's mention of his army service during the Vietnam War leads to relentless pestering from Munch, who does not believe his accounts, and Gaffney starts leaning on Mike Giardello to give him inside information on the performance of G's shift. So, any thoughts on that one?
So did you watch this one, Bradley?
Yes, but I don't remember where I was in the hangout. Did I give a score?
You were in the hangout. You did not give a score. Actually, I think you were in part two's hangout. That's the thing. But you watched both parts, and so you just talked about. You didn't have a score for part one, but you did talk about some of part one in your review of part two.
What I got from this is that the acting was good, and it was a good demonstration of a guy who was an accomplished ESTP. That guy who was just on screen before Gaffney.
Yeah, it's Chris Meloni playing the bounty hunter guy. Yeah,
and it was good, like the build-up for the Stewart and Munch confrontation further down the line. And so those two aspects from a character point of view were good. So that was a good example of an ESTP resembling person being an accomplished person, but of that same temperament and the preferences coming through. So those were the two aspects. Oh yes, and there was a thing about the way G saw this guy as a bounty hunter, and that's his reaction when he found out how much he was getting paid compared to his wage. I think when he said he got about 80,000 a year and he's on about 30,000, and what you had there with the confrontation between Giardello and the ESTP guy, and I like the way like he's holding him, but he's like completely calm with it because he's just like calm under pressure, and so the way that was played was very good. But the reason why they had that confrontation is that you've got this Giardello. He wants the police to do it. The police are accountable. From his point of view, that the police are good people and they're well trained. Up against this, what he sees as a cowboy bounty hunter organization where they can break the laws and not be necessarily accountable in terms of the procedure of how they catch the criminals. And so you can see a different approach between the SJ approach of being by the book and procedural and traditional in their approach, and the SP approach, which is more tactical and nimble in order to get the results. What do you think of that, Jeff?
Yes.
Right. So what about you, Bradley? Or did you not see it? Oh, you did see it.
I did see it. I don't really remember it that well.
What about the type What about the type aspects that I mentioned? Or temperament aspects?
Temperament aspects. I think I mean you made very valid points. Both the bounty hunter and G had like two independent ideas of like how to get the job done, and I very much resonated with like the whole P versus J preference thing of just because we don't see things the same way doesn't mean I'm any less right than you are. this standard like SJ self-righteousness coming in, and then the bounty hunter was just like not having it. So I like that dynamic. That's not to say that they weren't completely reckless. Like they invaded a home and like basically they didn't kill anyone innocent, right? But they were impeding on the police investigation, so obviously they're breaking the law. But wait, was it already investigation before they invaded the house, or did invading the house make an investigation? I don't remember the details.
No, that's when the homicide got involved because they shot the guy who was, I forget how he was related. I don't know if he was actually related. If he was just a friend of the guy who they were actually trying to get. But I mean, he was not innocent in the sense that he was involved with, as the other guy was, with drug stuff, but he wasn't the guy that they were chasing.
Right. So.
And they thought that he shot at him or that he had a gun.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
They saw like a flash or whatever. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so that's a pretty good SP versus SJ. This whole episode is pretty good, like a SP SJ. The SP's being rash and taking action, and sort of dealing with the fallout. So I think it's a pretty good temperament. It's just pretty good temperament enactment, like Ben was describing. Yeah, I don't remember this episode as well as I do the second part. So
yeah, when you said rash, when you said there, which one of the SPs was rash? I think because I think here we're seeing a difference between maybe
well, you could say P.J. Johnson was the one who actually shot the guy.
Right.
Yeah. Whereas
so it wasn't Chris Meloni's character. So
yeah. Whereas
also jumped bail trying to get the original guy.
Yeah.
Right.
I think maybe there's a difference there. I think the audience it's not like all SPs are the same. It's like you got to look at like the preference is still there. Even in somebody like the main guy who's the head of the bounty hunters, where he's more sophisticated and disciplined. And so, did he make any mistakes? Because we know that the guys under him made mistakes.
Well, I mean, that's kind of up for your interpretation.
Yeah.
Right.
Because he was sort of like the rare super ESTP that you sometimes see in TV.
I mean, the thing is that he's accountable. He's very much accountable for the actions of people who he employs, just like much like G would be. So I mean, you could call him like a super ESTP or an alpha ESTP, whatever you want to call him. But he's still very much like he's maybe he's not at fault, but he's not like he's not responsible for their actions. So, in my opinion,
I imagine a lot of ESTPs watching that and think, "I'd like to be that guy."
Maybe.
Like, head of bounty hunters, tracking people down, using my resources, and pretty much a role model for ESTPs, I suppose.
Yeah, I think Morgan said at the time, and I'll bring it up again because he said it again today multiple times. Actually, it started from a basketball game, but anyway, he said everybody hates ESTPs. Not that he's biased or anything. And I think he said that at the time too about the bounty hunter. He's like basically like, yeah, he's like right in everything he says and does, and he gets it in, and still nobody really gives him the credit, So, yeah, that was his contribution to that. But anyway, did you want to give part one a score, Bradley, or?
I don't think I will because I don't remember it at all.
All right, Ben and I both gave it an 8, so we'll just call that one an average of 8, and we'll move on to Wanted, Dead or Alive, Part 2. which was written by Anya Epstein and also directed by Robert Harmon. And in that one, Lewis and the injured woman are rushed to the hospital, and Johnson is rearrested. Mike insists on taking responsibility for the accident even after the woman dies and her husband files a wrongful death suit against the department. Once Noel and Mike work with Falzone to discover that the original fugitive has fled to Miami, the two of them head south with Bayless to bring him back. The resolution of the cases leaves a bad taste in everyone's mouth, though. As Gardy's wife files for divorce, he decides to spend all the money he can in order to keep her from getting any of it in the settlement. And I'll say that I agree with that thing about the resolution leaving a bad taste in everyone's mouth, and including me a little bit as a viewer. It's why I couldn't rate it higher than I did. I gave it a 7, but it's like there were certain elements that I really did like about it, and I thought it was realistic to have it end with, not everybody's happy. But I actually thought the parts with Mike and the husband, those parts were actually really good. And so, Ben was talking about how a little bit of a shaky start with Mike at the beginning of the season. I think this might have been where he started to come into his own, where he started to really see strong performances by the character, by the actor and the character, and they did that part well. I think both with him and with Lewis, because Lewis also tries to call the guy, thinking he hangs up on him or something like that. I don't know if there was another part of it like that. So you have some that's what kind of made it bleak, which made it harder to enjoy certain parts, but it was still well done. I can't really fault him for the production of it, and the acting is certainly good. It just if I'm left with that kind of feeling, then it's got to be just absolutely fantastic for me to be able to recover from that enough to really give the episode as much credit. So something like 3 Men and a Dino or A Doll's Eyes or something that there's really emotional impact, but it was still such good episode. So so good that I was able to set aside sort of the feeling I had. This one was not quite at that level, but I still enjoyed plenty of it.
Do you think with 3 Men and a Dino that it helped that, I'm not sure, but did we actually see her alive before she was killed?
Who, Adina?
Yeah, in the 3 Men
No.
and a Dino. Did we have... Because I just wondered if... Do you think that was a good choice? Do you think it would have been too emotionally raw if they'd had shown her alive before that? And I just wondered if that helped.
I think it was a good choice, but not because of that. I think it was just the show's mission was to show how homicide cops operate. And so they have to humanize the victim after the fact, in terms of when they're gathering the facts about the person, the victim, then they're learning about them from that. And so we saw several good instances over the years with Homicide in the picture being painted by other people's experience with the victim, as it is, you piece together, how that person was in their life. But yeah, it can certainly be more emotionally impactful if you see a character before that, but not necessarily. You can still, I think the point of Homicide was they were trying to capture that what these guys do, is less to do with that. So you had rare instances where they did actually talk to someone or attempt to before they were actually dead. Like you had the one that Bayless and Pendleton came up on that was beaten outside the gay bar. Like he was still alive briefly, but they couldn't get much information from him. And then you had the other episode about the woman that was in the hospital, and actually Falzone talked to her several times before she died.
How did Lewis get injured?
From the car accident that happened at the end of part 1.
Oh, right.
Somehow spaced out for that, huh? Yeah, that was actually, I think, my favorite part of the story was actually the ending of part 1, which, as I've said, is sort of a cheat in that when you're doing a 2-parter and you can have that suspenseful ending, that's the easiest thing to do, but it was still well done for what it was, as an action scene, and having, some doubt there whether Lewis was going to make it. So it was pretty effective as far as that goes.
Was it Chris Arnold that played the lead, the super ESTP?
Chris Meloni.
Chris Meloni, right. What other things has he been in? Because I think you mentioned him being in other things,
Well,
playing
I
a
mean, I've
completely
seen him on
different
other cop
character.
shows. He was one of the leads on Law and Order SVU, and he has played plenty of other, recurring characters and stuff on other TV shows. He was on NYPD Blue for a while. So in a period of a few weeks, because I was watching the NYPD Blue arc that he plays a character named Jimmy Leary, where he's a straight up thug. So I've seen him play that character that's just the thug character, and then I've seen him play the cop on SVU. So he's closer to by the book, even though not necessarily super by the book. And then we had the bounty hunter as being in between those two, whereas he's basically a scrupulous person, but his methods are outside the box and not, very much the demonstration of that part in the Kersey book where he talks about the difference between utilitarian and cooperator.
Yeah.
Where definitely utilitarian, his entire policy is do what's most effective in catching the criminal that he's after, as opposed to any by the book stuff.
Yeah, adaptive. Using any method approved or not.
Right.
As long as it's not too illegal. Or if they don't think they'll get caught.
So do you have any comments on this part, Bradley?
Yeah, I think it was a pretty I think it was a pretty good. Like I'd have to I think probably the reason I didn't really score the first part is because I was very much conscious that it feels very much like since Homicide is a pretty character. It's basically a character-driven show. To where the story is heavily the story is very much character-driven. That's what I meant to say. So it feels like the story itself wouldn't stick out as strong if you were just taking one part into account. So I think in terms of like both parts are like very, very good, but like parts by themselves weren't necessarily as strong. I don't think that's a bad thing because it's not really the point to have like two independent stories because it's all the same story even though it's 2 episodes. So I think I'd rate the both episodes together a lot stronger than the 2 individual episodes.
That makes sense.
Right. For this episode in particular, I wasn't a huge fan of the ending, not because not because of the actual case conclusion, but the whole way they finally got the guy was it didn't feel really organic to me. It's almost like they'd gone through 2 episodes, almost 2 full episodes of like trying to chase him, and then it sounds like to me I got the feeling that they like accidentally caught him just because it was sort of time in the show to like finally catch him. And it's almost I mean it's not I don't think it's inauthentic in that they're trying out different things and then they had an idea and it ended up working out. Like I think so you try different things and then something works and that's it. I mean it's very I think it works on a realistic level, but in terms of like a story progression level, I got the sense that it was sort of like it was a bit too forced because it was sort of the time in the show when things are time to wrap up, so we better have him catch the guy just so we can wrap up the show. That's the kind of feeling I got from it.
Yeah.
I don't think it was such a big deal that it like completely ruined my enjoyment of either part of the episode or even that episode in particular. It just sort of struck me out as like maybe not a It struck me as a weakness, but not like a huge weakness, is what I'm trying to say. I think he already scored it though, so I'll keep the score the same.
All right. Well, the individual episode, yeah, you gave it a 7.5. I gave it a 7, and Ben gave it a 10.
Mm-hmm.
He was heavily influenced by his favorite characters of the season, the silicone on the beach in Miami. So that gives us a average of a little over 8. All right, so we move on to actually the episode. But Ben went from a 10 all the way down to a 2 with the next, because his lowest rated episode of the season, which was Kellerman PI Part 1, which was written by James Yoshimura, Julie Martin, and Joy Lusko, and directed by Kenneth Fink. The discovery of a hastily buried newborn behind a motel leads Falzone and Stivers to a teenage couple, Debbie Straub and Craig Halpern. Although both of them insist that the baby was stillborn, the autopsy points to homicide. The case brings Mike Kellerman, now a private investigator hired by Debbie's parents to clear her name, back to the squad room in search of information. His arrival rankles most of the squad, and G orders Falzone and Stivers to tell him nothing. After Danvers gets indictments against Debbie and Craig, Kellerman advises the Straubs not to bail their daughter out. Soon afterwards, she calls home and offers to testify against Craig. So I guess my first question is, Bradley, did you see this episode?
I don't think I saw it.
Okay, so I'll turn it over to Ben. I believe Ben said the reason he rated it a 2 was simply because the disturbing nature of the case didn't allow him to really enjoy it much, but it wasn't as much a comment on anything about the performances or the production as it was just the bleakness of the.
Yeah, it's just too bleak for me. I think that just in the expressions there, from the way Reed Diamond played Kellerman, it reminded me of certain expressions on EJ R&D's face. Does your son make similar expressions to Kellerman?
Yeah, and we've talked about it before. In fact, in our discussion today or yesterday, whenever that was, when I was, I once again, I apologized to him and said, I'm sorry to compare you to DJ R&D again, but it sounds like something he would say. Because he was talking about something about how he loses respect for somebody when he figures out they're like, man, I can't remember how he put it, so I'm not going to try to paraphrase it, but it sounded a lot like something DJ R&D would say. But yeah, definitely similar expressions and mannerisms and stuff. So there definitely seem to be some things you can detect in ESTP behavior, kind of in physical things as well as not just personality, but some of the physical stuff that they can sometimes do.
I like this aspect where they weren't able to get much out of her, the normal cops, but you can see there from her reaction that the actress is playing it well, that Kellerman was able to like sweet talk her because she's sort of like hot for him. And so he was able to have more influence on her because you can see that she's quite taken with him.
Yeah, it's always, I mean, one of the things that was kind of consistent about his character over the time, you know, he was on the show regularly and through this is he's, and this one I do remember Morgan said that he's great at reading people and that he's constantly, you know, taking in information to read people better. And you can tell Kellerman does the same thing. And he figures out pretty quickly kind of the method that's most effective to get through to somebody, whether that was a suspect he was interrogating when he was still a homicide cop or getting the information he needs as a PI when his motive is different, but his methods are similar in terms of reading the person and figuring out what's going to be most effective and getting what he needs out of them.
So wait a minute, at the beginning of that statement there, Jeff, you said that, and Kellerman is, so was Morgan talking about himself?
Yeah.
Right, gotcha, now I understand. Right. Yeah, because there's a thing, folks, in Kersey Temperament Theory that the ESTP is best at reading body language, and that Kersey wrote that they can appear to be very empathetic, but it's just that they are very observant to body language. Now, how true do you think that is, Jeff? Is it just a few Is it just a small percentage of ESTPs that
Well,
are
I
really
mean, I
good
think
at that?
even though it's not very very specific word to use, I would say the smarter they are, the better they are doing that. And obviously, smart is a word that can be used in different ways. So it doesn't necessarily mean smart in terms of book smart. It just means in terms of how the perception that someone has, the sharpness, I guess, the sharpness of their brain in terms of how they're focused they are on doing that, how effective they can be. I remember there was a TV show. I didn't actually watch it, but I heard about it. That I think it was called "Lie to Me," and it was about a guy
Yep.
whose his expertise was basically reading people's body language and the things they said to determine, whether when they were lying and what they were lying about. He was brought in basically to, poke the holes in people's stories by determining what they were lying about. So that was his entire focus. So when you have someone that's focused on, I mean, in general, I always say with SPs, it's like what we're focused on, we're going to be good at. And so what we're not good at, then we don't tend to focus on anymore. So it kind of is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And Kersey said that too, as well, about what you practice, then you tend to get better at, and what you're good at, you tend to practice more. So it tends to reinforce what you're already naturally skilled at.
So is the ideal for an ESTP to be really good at something, and not just be really good at something, but to make it look really easy?
I don't know how much that is a factor. You'd probably have to ask an ESTP that, whether that aspect is important to them. But
Because it's more impressive that way.
I almost would say, since Morgan's not around, I can say this without him jumping in to contradict me. I almost think there's a part of them that sort of likes that, oh, everybody hates me thing. Like there's sort of they kind of thrive off that a bit, even if it's just to motivate themselves to do other things. But it's sort of a victim complex thing that they kind of put on themselves because, of course, from my perspective, I see ESTPs are loved and applauded all the time. So I definitely don't see it as everybody hates them at all. There's definitely a lot of people who are attracted in many ways to ESTPs. So
yeah, I mean it's like I kind of understand what he means. It's like not that people like what ESTPs can do, but it's like they don't like them as people, I think.
Yeah, well, they can be in awe of them in various ways, and
right.
How far that goes depends on what the other motivations are. Like the people that are actually attracted to them personality-wise and want to pursue actual relationships with them are obviously going to take that further. But there are people that can be in awe of ESTPs that don't necessarily want to seek that kind of thing, but they still have a certain like respect or appreciation for them. And I said that to Morgan yesterday, is that I said, if I don't say it enough, I do appreciate you and your abilities to read people and all those things, so it's not ignored by me. It can't, I said something about how just because I can appreciate that without necessarily always agreeing with you, and that was the point I was trying to get across.
Yeah.
Was that, but anyway, so as far as the scores go, I gave Kellerman PI part 1 an 8, and Ben gave it a 2, which makes an average of 5, which is the lowest average score of any of the episodes of the season, even though it wasn't the. Anyway, okay, so we move on to part 2 of Kellerman PI, and in this one. Is credited to Tom Fontana, Eric Overmeyer, and Sean Whitesell as the writers and directed by Jay Tobias. And in this one, Debbie testifies against Craig as part of a plea bargain resulting in his conviction on a murder charge, but Falzone is not satisfied with the outcome. A visit with Craig reveals Debbie's involvement in the baby's death. Shortly afterwards, he hangs himself in his cell. Shepard's curiosity about Kellerman's departure from the squad stirs up bad feelings all around. But she lends him a sympathetic ear at the waterfront. Falzone's contempt for his former co-worker softens after Kellerman brings in voicemail recordings that show just how thoroughly Debbie manipulated Craig. So I had to say before I let Ben say something that even though I gave this the same score as I gave part 1, I gave it an 8. is a very different feeling in this episode, even though the bleakness remains. Obviously, Ben was able to enjoy it a lot more because he gave it a 7. But it's like, just every time you would kind of have that moment where you're like, this is looking better, something would happen to kind of bring it back down again. So it definitely maintained the overall bleakness feeling, and you don't have a happy ending in any capacity. You don't really see justice done for the baby that's killed, and you have, the father kill himself. So really the only thing you have is sort of a semi, like it mentioned, a semi sort of make-up thing with Falzone and Kellerman that Falzone basically sort of begrudgingly says, Kellerman, you're not as bad as I thought you were, kind of thing. Like, maybe I see your good side, which is, maybe that kind of what we were just talking about, like an appreciation for the methods of some, or the ability of someone, even if the methods are in question. So they're probably not ever going to be best friends, but they have a certain respect for each other, even though, of course, Kellerman denies that he was the one that did that brought him anything. Out to the end, he's like, still says, what recordings or whatever, which again reminds me of my son, because he would probably say the same thing. He wouldn't admit it either. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that one.
What did you think of her as an actress, Jeff? And did she go on to do other things?
She did. You asked me that at the time, and I listed a few things that she was credited with.
Yeah.
I don't remember what what her most famous appearance was, but I thought she was good because she was effective in portraying the fact that she really was like detached from her child to an almost scary point, and the fact that they pointed out how the fact that Craig, the father, referred to the baby because it was his son as he, and she kept saying it. So it was like she was seeing it as an object rather than a human being.
And Falzone picked up on that. Right.
So it highlighted the observation skills of both of them somewhat, and that they were sort of on opposite sides, and yet, the conclusion is that they weren't really on opposite sides entirely, in terms of they just had different motives for what they were doing.
And I think it was well played by Reed Diamond of Kellerman obviously going for the money, but also trying to be moral about it.
Yeah.
What else? There's something about this. Oh, yes. Yeah, what I'm saying in these early episodes is the way Callie Thorne is playing Ballard. And there seems... Do you think maybe they just toned it down a little bit? I like the way she's playing Ballard in these early episodes. Maybe it's because of the stories, but I like that little bit of... Just that little bit of light touch that she's putting, like here, just with the way she smiles and things like that. Do you think that went down a bit? Or was it just the nature of the storylines?
Yeah, I don't know if there was a network directive here at this point. Okay, we're going to get her on a treadmill so she can be a little bit, she can have a little bounce in her step, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what you're referring to when it comes to that, so I don't really know how to answer that.
There's just like the little looks on her face, like the amusing, cheeky looks.
So you're saying she did less of that later in the season?
Yeah, that's what I think so.
I mean, it's possible. I don't know. I didn't really pay a lot of attention to that specifically. So
I think it's because the storyline just went off the boil between her and Falzone. And I always thought that she played her scenes well with Falzone.
I think in general, and I'll talk about this probably more in the part 2 and when we get to the end, is that, because I'll talk about my overall thoughts, but I think the season overall, a little bit disjointed. They weren't quite sure which direction they wanted to go in a lot of areas. And so that may have been something that was the case. Different writers or different directors may have told her different things, and she may have, I don't know how much input she had as far as what way she wanted to do with the character. So it's hard to tell exactly. Whether it was really a change in the character or whether just something that sort of fell by the wayside as they went. All right, so as I said, I give that one an 8. Ben gave it a 7, so that's an average of 7.5. And we move on to episode 10, which was called Shades of Grey. And in this one, as written by David Simon, Julie Martin, and T.J. English, and directed by Adam Bernstein. When a white bus driver runs into a pregnant woman in a black neighborhood, a riot breaks out that leaves both the driver and a West Indian passenger dead. The detectives question the witnesses and themselves about the effect that race may have played in this violence and are surprised at the answers they find. Lewis's discovery of a police uniform button near the passenger's body leads the squad to an officer who had been questioned in the shooting death of a black man 5 years earlier. See the season 2 episode See No Evil and Black and Blue. As Lewis and Shepard track down a witness, Shepard suffers a brutal beating and loses her gun. Lewis is shot at and nearly killed as well. The gun is returned after an angry Lewis speaks to a packed West Indian dance club, and the officer and 3 other suspects are arrested in connection with the 2 deaths. So this is one I have very mixed feelings about, and I said so at the time. It's what kept me from giving it as high a score as Ben did, because I love like all of the stuff about the actual crime and the stuff with the bus driver, the conversations about the racial situation, the West Indian guy, trying to do the right thing. Like all of those aspects were really well done. The parts with Lewis and Shepard, to me, detract from the episode because it really seemed like they were trying to find some way to make Shepard have an impact, make her a part of the story, and this is the way they chose to do it. And I thought all that was a little bit cheesy, especially like Lewis just goes into the bar and asks for the gun back and somebody returns. Like, that was a little unrealistic. And so to me that detracted from it. So it's almost one of those where it seems like it was 2 episodes in one, and one of them I think is fantastic and would give a 10 for sure. And then the other aspect, and I think I said this at the time, that the other stuff I gave a 5, so it averaged out to an 8 because it was such a mixed bag from those 2 sides of it.
I think it's believable though that Lewis being so, and there is quite a number of occasions where he goes in front of people and like maybe he's like so confident of him being part of the community.
Oh yeah. I'm not saying that him doing that is unrealistic. I'm saying the fact that that was effective, I think, was a little unrealistic. The fact that that's what all it took, that the gun would be returned because he did that. I think the general reaction of the people as he was talking kind of seemed to be a whatever, man. There, even were some of the people that waved their hand in a dismissive way at him. So the idea that that actually worked, that was the part I was saying was unrealistic.
Right.
Not that he wouldn't try, because that did seem like a Lewis thing to do. That he was going to try to kind of do a little bit of, like you said, in the community, he's kind of doing a little flexing there where he's trying to say, look, I'm one of y'all. I'm not some outsider guy, even though I'm a cop. And here's the, and he even says, that it was, a black man got hurt too. It wasn't just the white guy. So he on multiple occasions, Lewis has flat out told a group of black people, hey, somebody black was hurt here, so help me out. Sometimes more effective than others, but
yeah, he also tends to go a little bit more street when he talks to them, doesn't he?
Yeah, because obviously he's trying to
connect.
He's trying to push that I'm one of you angle. So he's trying to use again that utilitarianism to get what he needs.
And when Bradley talks to me, he might go more English.
I'll get to that in a bit. Here's a question for you, though. Do you think he's downplaying his, quote, streetness when he's around, like, the squad? Or do you think he was leaning more into it when he was in a situation? Because I didn't see the episode, so I don't have context.
I would say it depends. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Like, it depends on who he's talking to and what he's trying to get across.
Sure.
So I think... for instance, early in the series when he was partnered with Cressetti, I think he actually probably did a little less with him. That maybe he was trying to sound a little bit more intellectual because Cressetti was.
Yeah.
Cressetti kind of had that, I'm always looking at all these angles and conspiracies and stuff. And so even though Lewis would call him a salami brain and things like that, he would still, I think he did care, and it came out later once Cressetti wasn't around anymore, that he did care about how he felt about him. And so he kind of wanted to engage him a little more on what he thought Cressetti's, not level exactly, but his kind of framework, as opposed to playing up more like the I'm from the streets kind of angle. But it depends on who he was talking to and what he was trying to talk about. Like when he was with Kellerman, it kind of came and went depending on what the issue was. Like when he talked about what happened to his brother or cousin, whoever it was, the one that was in the mental institution. So
there always have been these sort of like racial sensitivities with Lewis, where sort of like with Frank as well, where there was that storyline where there was about the slavery, and there was a woman who was recapturing slaves, and he decides to go to a different museum, which is like a real place in Baltimore. I think it's part of the Underground Railroad, and like places where real escaped slaves were being hidden. And he went to sort of like that museum, which was a real museum. Oh yeah, and towards the end of the season, he talks about the fact that people are calling him man and relating. So even though he talks in a street way, there's another part of him that wants to be treated as a professional.
Yeah.
So, and both of those things can be true, because one of the things Robert McKee writes about is that real people in real life do have contradictions, and the contradictions are true. So, for instance, you can have somebody who is both nasty and nice. It just depends who it's with. That dimension can be brought out, and so people.
Yeah, and in this episode, I really liked the characterization of all the people involved and from their individual perspectives. Their take on it was very raw and realistic in terms of this is how people are seeing this from their angle, including the daughter of the bus driver, who did what we said before. Like in this case, we did see the bus driver alive before the murder, but his character information was still more filled in by other people and their perception of him than it was what we actually saw of him, because it wasn't very long. It was just a few minutes at the beginning of the episode. All we saw was basically him getting annoyed at the guys playing their music too loud.
And I think the actor played that well. I remember in a previous episode about at a country club, and the guy didn't, and the actor, in my opinion, did not give him enough respect, the character, and he sort of like overdid it. Whereas I think this guy, he played the character for real.
Yeah. I mean, I can't fault any of the characterizations in this episode. They were all, to me, spot on. That was the best thing about it. I would, if it weren't for the Shepard Lewis stuff with the other witness, I would recommend this episode to anybody. That's the only part to me that takes it down a notch.
I love all that. I love that stuff with Lewis and how he got upset in the hospital.
Well, even that had good parts to it. It's just, I don't know, there was just something about the elements of it that just rubbed me the wrong way. But yeah. So it's hard. Again, it was hard for me to judge the overall stuff because of that. But so many good, strong things in it. So overall, the characterization probably the best of the season.
And in
terms of there.
I like how Lewis got part of his speech was about his lid being shut. I think he called it his lid, where he talks about his hat and all of that stuff. I thought that was a really good speech from Lewis. In that, and the acting was good as well.
And
from Clark
Bradley,
Johnson.
You weren't in that hangout, but did you see the episode?
I think it's frozen.
Oh, okay. Well, hopefully he'll be back. But I will say, and if he is, he can comment on that. But I'll say that I gave it an 8. Ben gave it a 9 for an average of 8.5 for the two of us. And well, I mean, do you want to go ahead and wrap it up in case he's not going to be back, or?
Yeah, I think that might be best because it's 2:18 in the AM.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Well, that makes sense because we're almost to the halfway point anyway of the season.
Right.
So, and I know he saw the next one. So,
Right. Yeah.
He keeps on occasionally giving this thing about saying on the screen Vaseline is no longer presenting. Does that mean you're just not showing pictures?
Yeah. And also, there's the presenting thing is when you don't just share screen, but it's like you press that so everyone can see it.
Gotcha. Okay.
Without having to like click on the square.
All right, so we'll go ahead and wrap up part 1 of this then, so that Bradley can be there for the next one, and just say thanks for joining us for part 1 of season 7 in review, and join us next time. We don't know exactly when we're going to do part 2, but as soon as we reasonably can get everybody scheduled together and do that, we'll conclude the rest of season 7. So join us for that.
Right then, I'm just remembering that we've done Shades of Grey. Is that the one we just did, Jeff?
Yes.
Just
did Shades of Grey, episode 10. So we will
Right.
resume next time with episode 11, Bones of Contention.
Right then, bye-bye, folks.
Bye.